Hey peeps, welcome to another video. Today it is part 2 of the Swoon Carter messenger bag sew along. So today we are going to be making the shoulder strap, the handle and putting together the flap. So let's get started. This is the first time that you have worked with vinyl. They have some great tips for you on the beginning of the pattern. I am using a universal 90 needle for mine, and that's worked really well. But again, you want to experiment and see which works best for you. Have a read through these tips and tricks here for working with vinyl, and have a play with a scrap piece of vinyl before you start working on your cut bag pieces. You guys know me, I like to jump around and I never quite follow the pattern as it's written. So we're going to jump right to the final step and we're going to make the shoulder strap. So we should have our shoulder strap piece, which is 4 inches by 24 inches, or if you're in my case 30 inches because I prefer a longer shoulder strap. And we're going to ignore this for the beginning, and I'm going to finish the ends slightly differently. It's something that I've been doing with vinyl and so far for me it works. This will be something that you need to check that your machine can do. So I'm going to fold under these edges by 1/4 of an inch and I'm going to stitch them down before I do anything else, and I'm going to do that for both short raw ends. So we want to turn the short ends of our straps under by 1/4 of an inch, and to do that accurately I've made a mark 1/2 an inch in from the raw edge just using a ruler, and I've marked it with a chalk line. As you can see, I'm working with a black background here, so I need to use something that's visible. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold over the raw edge so that it meets that chalk line, and that will give me a nice even 1/4 of an inch turn on my strap. So I'm going to clip that into place. I'm now going to stitch this with the stitch length that I have practiced on the scrap bit of faux leather. For me it's a 3.5 stitch, and I'm using my blind hem foot, as you know I like to do, because it has the guide. So I have my needle moved all the way over to the left, and I'm going to use this guide here to run against the edge of the fabric so that I have an even line of top stitching on my strap. So you should end up with something that looks like this. So the next thing we need to do is fold our raw edges in to meet that dashed line that we made earlier. Now again, if you're working with fabric, this is going to be so much easier because you can press it, but obviously with faux leather you cannot. So we're going to be making our long raw edges meet that dashed line, and we're going to be wonder clipping that in place, and you want to do that for both sides. You can use double-sided tape to help this stick down. I find that I can get it done with just wonder clips, but if you want the added security, double-sided tape, I would advise that you don't run the double-sided tape right up against the dashed line, because when you press this down and actually get everything folded over, that dashed line is where we're going to be sewing, and this tape can sometimes make your stitches skip. So if you're going to use double-sided tape, offset it a little bit into the interior of your strap. So I'm going to go across and get all of my long raw edges folded into that dashed line. So once you've got both raw edges meeting in the middle, and I'm having to use giant wonder clips because both Mum and I are making this bag at the same time, so we then want to fold it over so that the folded edges meet, and we're going to wonder clip the entire way along so we can then top stitch that down. Once you've top stitched both sides, you should end up with something that looks like this. And now we're going to take our swivel clasps or our swivel hooks, and you're going to thread those through, and it should be a tight fit because these are 1 inch wide. And then you're going to fold that back on itself by about 3/4 of an inch, and then we need to stitch this down. Now you're going to be going through a lot of layers here, so you want to take it slowly. Your machine should do it. Take it slowly, hand crank it if you need to, and we are also going to rivet this once we're finished. So I'm going to sew a line of stitching along here, and then I'm going to repeat on the same thing for the other end with the second swivel clasp. So you should end up with something that looks like this. I'm now going to put a rivet into the center of both of these pieces. If you're finding that your machine is not liking sewing through the folded under piece as well, you can always sew here along this bit here so that you're sewing through less layers. My machine did it. It didn't like it, but it did do it. So again, this is one of those things that you need to maybe practice with a scrap bit of vinyl and see how many layers your machine is willing to sew through. Okay, so I have put my rivets in, I have set them, and my shoulder strap is now done. And 30 inches, this still looks really short, but I'm sure it'll be fine. So I'm going to move on to the first instruction. So the first thing that it would like us to do is fuse the fleece onto the main panel, the bottom panel, the flat panel and the side panels. Now you want to center the fleece around so that the fleece is not in the seam allowance. So the seam allowance varies, but when we're sewing these main body parts together, it's 1/2 inch. For all of the vinyl and strap pieces, I think it's around about 1/4 inch, but she does say when the seam allowance changes. We're going to fuse the fleece to the main panel, the bottom panel, the flat panel and the side panels. I'm also going to fuse my interfacing to my lining pieces and my zipper pocket piece. Okay, so I have my fleece fused to all of the panels that need it. So the next thing that I'm going to work on is the handle. So I have the handle here, which is this 16 inch by 2 inch piece, and we're going to be doing the same thing. We're going to be taking the raw edges and we're going to be folding those into the center, which is why I have marked that dashed line at 1 inch away from both raw edges. But we're only going to be folding over the once this time. So the first instruction is actually to fold the raw edges into the center mark and pin them down, and then to slide on your rectangular rings. I find that quite difficult, so I've put my rectangular rings on first, and I've made sure that the underside or the wrong side of my rectangular rings is to the wrong side of the fabric. As you can see here, there's no join on this side. So the next thing that we want to do is put the two short raw ends together, and we're going to sew those at 1/4 inch, and you want to make sure that it's not twisted, so you don't want it twisted around like that. You need it to be nice and flat, and we're going to sew these two short ends together at 1/4 inch. So I have sewn at 1/4 inch, and then I've top stitched my seam allowance down. If you're working with fabric, you won't need to do this, but because I'm working with vinyl, obviously can't press it, so I just wanted to make sure that it behaved itself and I didn't end up with it too much on one side and not evenly spaced like this. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're now going to take the raw edges and we're going to make them meet that center dashed line that we had done earlier. Okay, so once you've folded everything in, you're then going to need to manipulate it so that you've got the seam about 1 inch from one of the sides, and that you've got your rectangular rings at each end, and you've pinched the fabrics together so that we've enclosed all of the raw edges. And what we're going to do now is we're going to top stitch all the way around our handle so that we are enclosing all the raw edges and finishing the handle off. You want to stitch as close as you can to the rectangular rings, and you're going to back stitch at the start and the stop. So once you've done all your top stitching, you should end up with something that looks like this. This is the wrong side, this is the right side. So the next step is to get our handle connectors. So these are the two pieces that are 2.5 inches long by 2 inches wide, and again I have marked on the center, so we are going to fold the raw edges in to meet the center. So I have the handle connectors folded, raw edges folded in to meet the middle, so I'm going to top stitch both of these edges in the same manner that I've been doing for everything else, and we can then thread them through the rectangle rings. Okay, so the two handle connectors, I have top stitched the edges down. So what you want to do now is thread one of those through one of the rectangular rings, and then we are going to baste at 1/8 inch, and basting is, this is not going to be stitches that we remove, so you're going to use your regular construction stitch or the top stitching length that you've been using for the top stitching that you've been doing everywhere else, but we're going to close this edge and make sure that it doesn't come apart so that it's going to be easy for us to attach this to the bag later on. So I'm going to sew this at 1/8 inch along there, and I'm going to repeat that with this other handle connector on the other side. Once you have sewn your handle connectors on, you should end up with something that looks like this, and this is going to be our top handle. So we're going to put this to the side for now, and we're going to start working on our closure straps. Okay, so the next thing we're going to be doing is working with our closure straps. So again, you should have the middle marked with the dashed line. If you don't, mark it now. Once you've marked the center, you're going to then take the raw edges and fold them in to meet that center line, and then we are going to be folding it in half so that the short ends meet, and we're going to be clipping that all into place. So I'm going to get that done for this one, and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. Okay, so once everything has been folded into the center and then folded in half, you should end up with something that looks like this. So we're going to take our handle connector and we want to measure 2.5 inches down from the raw edge, so the unfolded edge, the edge that looks like this, not the edge that looks like this. We're going to slide our handle connector in between the two layers so that we end up with 1/2 inch extending outside of the strap connector, and we are then going to top stitch from the bottom all the way down to the folded edge, pivot around the bottom short edge, and then back up the other side. So it's 2.5 inches down, and then we want 1/2 inch of this showing. So I'm going to get this into place and I'll show you what it looks like. So you want to end up with something that looks like this. I have this piece sandwiched between the two strap connector edge sides, and it is 2.5 inches down, and we've got 1/2 inch of the connector showing. So I'm going to start top stitching here and going to go all the way down to the edge, pivot, and then all the way back up the other side. When you're done, you should end up with something that looks like this. So it's 2.5 inches down, there's 1/2 inch there. I'm going to repeat all of those steps with my second closure strap so that I can add it onto this side. When you've done all that, you should end up with something that looks like this. So we've got the folded edge here, and we have the raw edge at the top, and we have our handle in the middle, and this is going to be the decoration for the flap, which is the thing that we're going to be doing next. Okay, so we're going to start working on the flap now. So on the right side of the exterior flap panel, and if you're using the same fabric for both the flap and the lining, then this is the one with the fleece attached to it. We are going to find the center, and then we need to mark 3 inches to either side of the center at the top and the bottom of the flap. I have got my friction pen and I've tested this on a scrap piece of fabric, and this will wipe off. I did use my chalk roller, but the chalk wiped off, but the roller made little indents in the faux leather, so I didn't want to use that. I have found the center, and then I've marked 3 inches to either side of the center, and I have clipped my strap closures into place. You should end up with your handle doing handle type things in the middle here. Now I am going to use rivets to attach mine, so I'm going to be riveting here and here, and then I'm also going to be riveting 6 inches up from the bottom of the flap, making sure that my strap is at that point that I've marked there, that's 3 inches away from the center. So I'm going to clip this one into place as well, and then I'll be riveting around about here. So I'm going to baste the straps on at the beginning so that they are nice and secure and don't go anywhere, so that I have a good start for getting my rivets in the right place. The studio assistant is trying her best to be helpful. So I have tried to give myself a fighting chance of getting my rivet nice and centered. So I used a straight edge to kind of mark over from this piece here. So I've marked that there. And once I've got those 2 marks in, I then used those to give myself 2 diagonal lines from this corner to there, so that I have a center point to put my rivet in. And then I need to measure up 6 inches from the bottom of this strap and make a mark centered 6 inches up. So I'm going to use my seam gauge again to do that, and then I'm going to punch my holes for my rivets and put my rivets in, and then the flap is nearly finished. So again, I've used my seam gauge, which is 6 inches long, so I marked a horizontal line across that. So I found the center point and I've done a cross, and again that will give me a nice place to aim to get my rivet in. And the important part is that you make sure that you have your strap clipped to the 3 inches from the center mark, so it should be 6 inches apart here. So this is the center, 3 inches from that side. I have made a mark, I've got my strap right up against that mark, and I've got it clipped in place. So I'm now going to use my rivet press to make holes in those so that I can then put the rivets in. Once you've got your rivets in place, you should end up with something that looks a little bit like this. So the next thing that we are going to work on is our magnetic snap closures. So I'm going to get those out and see how I get on with using vinyl to make the ones that I want to make. We shall see how that goes. So I am using the vinyl snap tab connectors. I did try it with the woven ones, and whilst I could sew them together, turn them round, the top stitching on them had to be absolutely so perfect, and even one little bit being out didn't look very good, so I decided to go with the vinyl strap connectors. So I have used this as a template for marking where the center of the magnet needs to go, like that. I've then put the backing plate over and marked where the 2 prongs will go through. I'm going to make those into holes, put the prongs through, put the backs on, and then sew them wrong sides together at 1/4 inch. Okay, so after you've installed your magnetic clasp and you've folded back the arms like this, I've then drawn on my stitching line at 1/4 inch, and we're going to put these wrong sides together, and I'm going to stitch around that the whole way around, and then we're going to trim our seam allowance down to 1/8 inch, and I'm going to do that for both of these. So I have sewn around at 1/4 inch using the guide that I put on, which I was very grateful for, and then this one I've trimmed down to 1/8 inch. So I'm going to do the same with this one, trim all of this excess away. Okay, so we need to pin our snap tabs 2.75 inches in from the center that we marked earlier. So this is my center, and I have marked over 2.75 inches or 2 3/4 inches, and we need to put the tabs on with obviously this out of the way, this way up, so the magnetic side facing up, and we're going to baste those into place, and I'll show you once I've got them put into place properly. So I have basted my snap tabs into place, and we are now going to get our other flap piece, or the flap lining, and we're going to sandwich it all together. So you want to make sure that you've pinned all of these pieces out of the way so they don't get caught in the stitching, and we're going to pin all the way around, and we're going to sew that at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So we're going to sew all the way around at 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you should end up with something that looks a bit like this. I'm going to trim this all down to 1/4 inch so that I can turn it through and top stitch all of the edges. Okay, so I get to turn my first thing through, which is exciting. Now, I have of course made my life difficult by using all vinyl, but I think it's going to look really nice when it's done. So you want to make sure that you're getting your fingers right in there and turning around all of the curves. And if you are all using all vinyl like me, you're going to need to use your wonder clips to pin the edges so that the edges stay nice and sharp for you when you top stitch. And when you're top stitching, you want to keep these, your snap closure tabs, out of the way so that they're not there, and also this, not so that it doesn't get caught in any of the top stitching, because you want those to sit like that, not up like that or under like that. So I'm going to go around and clip with my wonder clips, and then I'm going to sew around the entire edge, including this top edge. I'm going to baste this shut, and then I'm going to sew top stitch all the way around these edges in the same manner that I have for the rest of the bag. I get that done and then show you what it looks like. Once you've top stitched everything, you should end up with something that looks a little bit like this. So if you have any questions at all, please let me know in the comments section down below, and I will do my best to answer them for you. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, and I will see you again very soon. Bye!